All right, thanks for your patience, everybody. This is Becky, and my co-moderator is Ashley. This session is with Chris Tabb from the Maryland School for the Blind, and it's titled Wayfinding and Assistive Devices for Adults and Children with Visual Impairments and Deaf Blindness. The opening code for this session is Terwilliger. I'll spell that Terwilliger. And Ashley will put that in the chat box. We'll have a Q&A in the last few minutes of the session. If you have questions throughout, you can put it in the chat box, and then we'll facilitate that at the end with Chris. And let us know if you're having any issues viewing the captioning or the interpreters, and you can add that in the chat box and we'll sort it out. All right, so I'm gonna let Chris get started. This is Chris Tabb. He's with the Maryland School for the Blind. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much, Becky. And I'm gonna ask for everyone's help today. First of all, thank you for being here, and thank you for your patience and letting me be a fill-in. I'm coming somewhat unprepared, just filling in. Yesterday, I guess there was an opening and needed to be filled, so I appreciate your patience as I muddle my way through this one. I'm going to ask both Becky and Ashley if I will probably miss things in the chat, if they could read out if questions come in there, and I'm going to encourage everyone who is participating to please, so we can make this as advantageous for everyone in this particular session. If you have questions, if you have comments, if you have ideas, please do share them. This goes much better when we all share what we know, because it really does take a village. For some folks, this will likely be some redundancy, things you know or have heard before. I'll try to walk through some of the resources like the live binders to help people know where to find things. While the chat is open, if you all could take a moment, I don't have a survey slide, but if you all could take a moment and just kind of indicate whether you're new to the field of O&M, whether you're a veteran or a rookie, or if you're not from the O&M field, maybe if you're a transportation engineer or traffic engineer, if you could let me know that would really help me to get a sense of who's in the audience and hopefully what we can give you. So thank you for doing that. I sure appreciate it. And the title is Wayfinding and Assistive Devices, which is kind of wide open. And so as I look at the chat, we've got some folks who have decades of experience, some folks who are new, some folks who are just in the program getting started. And so it looks like we're going to need an array of things. And again, please, if there are things that I can hopefully help you with, please ask. I know that in attendance, at least from scrolling the list of names, there's folks with lots of experience. So if there's questions that I do not address fully, please jump in if you can to share what you know. This is a tremendous field for sharing of information. In terms of wayfinding, things are a little bit different right now for those that work with school-age students, because at least in Maryland and many states across the country, schools are, for all intents and purposes, closed. We're working to try to deliver services in a remote sense, and that wayfinding and how we deliver that service takes a little bit of doing. For some people, that might turn out to be like tech support over the phone when they're talking with a client or a student. For some people who feel comfortable doing that, they're able to use some of the accessories on their phone, their smartphone, or having a helper with them, like a parent, to be able to have those individuals go out and do some wayfinding activities while the orientation mobility specialist is helping from behind the scenes using a system like Zoom or some other video conference platform. So I'm going to jump over for a moment, or a little bit more than a moment, to live binders, which was one area that people had indicated. Specifically, Amy Parker had thought that would be a good thing to share. So I'm going to jump over to that. I'm going to try to share my screen and try to, again, I'll be relying on Becky and Ashley as I get distracted here. If you could share when different topics come up, feel free to jump in and just speak out on the on the presentation because I may not be looking at the chat window at that moment. So I'm going to try to share my screen. I'm going to jump into just a Firefox browser, and hopefully you all will see that. What I'm going to do, this is the landing page. It might look a little bit different if you're using a smartphone or an iPad, but basically the website is livebinders.com. And this is a place where you can store information. It's a cloud-based service. And I'm going to go to the search screen. And the easiest way to do this is to go to the second search field. And there's a drop-down list. And you can choose from a variety of different ways to search. In this case, name doesn't represent the name of the author. It represents the name of a binder. So we're actually going to choose author. And you can just put in my last name, which is Tabb. And when you search that, it should bring up all those binders. And again, depending on the screen resolution or the type of computer you're using, it may look bigger, smaller, it might look a little bit different. There's probably about, I'm going to say 25 to 30 binders here. We're going to go through a couple of them that are related to wayfinding and assistive devices. I think the newest one that just got added is about delivering remote services, so we may have an opportunity to look at that as well. I'm going to go ahead just to give you an overview of what's here and how this works, so that as we go along, if you find things that are interesting to you and you want to go back later to look at them yourself, to share them, you'll be able to do that. Excuse me. The LiveBinder platform is free for anyone to use and share. If you want to be able to do more with live binders, just like Dropbox, you can pay a fee. They do have a teacher account so that you can save a little money there. But this is a terrific way to share resources that you find with those that you're working with. You can create a binder just for the individual that you're working with, or with parents so that they will know how to access information and they can all be figuratively on the same page. So this particular binder is about accessible GPS devices and apps, and there's categories that are on the left-hand side of the screen. I'm going to try to jump back to, let's see, the chat.
This is Ashley. We have a request for you to speak a little bit slower so that everyone
I'm
can
sorry.
keep up. Thank you.
I think I'm nervous and I'm trying too hard, so I'll slow it all down. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
The tabs that are on the left-hand side of the screen, those tabs represent categories. Just like in a physical binder, you would have a tab to be able to open up and find out what's in that area. So I'm going to click this accessible GPS devices. This has a listing of several different kinds of devices. Some are standalone devices that just do one thing. For instance, the Victor Reader Trek from Humanware. That particular device is a standalone device that I'm going to go ahead and click that link so we can jump to the web page on Humanware. This device is a GPS that's not a smartphone. It's now combined with a Victor Reader or Victor Reader Stream so that you can have audio material content like Daisy Player or EPUB, other types of material, as well as internet radio to be able to use that device for. It replaces the Trekker Breeze, and so now the Victor Trek is both the Victor Reader as well as the Trekker. And the button arrangement is not as it was on the original Trekker Breeze, so there's a little bit of a learning curve. The benefits of a device like this are that it has a much longer battery life when using GPS. If you use GPS on a smartphone, your battery will last, let's say, a couple of hours compared to closer to 8 hours with this standalone device. There are some adults, usually seniors, who are a little bit resistant to working with some newer technology. They like things that have actual physical buttons. And I'm sorry, I'm practicing ageism. There are also younger people who feel more comfortable with buttons. But many of our senior population that did not grow up, for lack of a better way to put that, with the internet and touch screens, feel much more comfortable with a device that has physical features that they can interact with. And that's something that this device does offer. I'm going to jump back to that live binder. Let's see. I'm gonna try to jump back, doing the same system.
This is Ashley speaking. Chris, we have a comment saying, "Goodness, $699." And we also have a question. Besides battery life, do you see benefits to this device over an app like Nearby Explorer?
Okay, thank you very much. The $699 price tag is very expensive. There are some things that are have become mainstream. Smartphones have become, they've taken accessibility to a different place because people who are buying off-the-shelf products expecting it to have text-to-speech or speech-to-text now extend far beyond those who need it for accessibility. There are many people who just like that because it provides the ability to listen to news stories in their car, to be able to respond to texts auditorily while they're doing other activities. So the economies of scales have brought the price down. When we think about just a Perkins Brailler, we're still in the $700 category. It's more expensive than many laptops nowadays. So part of that just has to do with a limited pool of buyers. The places that we might normally find funding authorities to be able to provide that would be places like the VA. There are, not that there's an unlimited stream of funds through the federal agencies, but they would have a greater ability to provide those for the clients that we work with. There are sometimes family members who are able to provide that. Let's say an uncle who knows that their nephew or niece needs a special device, they might be perfectly happy to go and spend $700 on that. So I know it's expensive. If it becomes a tool that you use every day, that price seems much more reasonable. So it really, when I think about how much I use my smartphone, and I usually buy a smartphone outright, it's $1,000. So yes, they're expensive, but it kind of goes along with the territory these days. And I've forgotten the second question. I think, Nearby Explorer. The benefits of this compared to an app that's running on a smartphone is that for some people, you do not need a cell phone plan in order to use it. It gives a different type of information. There's also less interruption. There are no texts coming in. There are no phone calls coming in. It's a one-trick pony, except for now it does have the ability to be a reader as well. But for the most part, it allows someone to be just focused on what it is that they're doing, which for some people is an ideal scenario. The complexity of using a smartphone, updating the smartphone, maintaining the battery, so on and so forth, for some people is very challenging. And that would be the side benefit, we'll say. There are benefits to using an app like Nearby Explorer with a smartphone that the Victor Trek cannot do at the moment. At the moment, I cannot ask the Victor Trek to take me somewhere, like I can ask Siri or OK Google to find an address and provide transit directions. That isn't something that happens on anything but a smartphone because of the internet connectivity when you are out and about, as well as its voice recognition ability and that, let's just say, AI ability, that artificial intelligence. So the Internet of Things exists in the Victor Reader Trek. It does connect to the internet. It does download software. You no longer have to put it on a SD card to update maps. That can happen over the internet, but it's only happening through Wi-Fi. It doesn't have its own internet connection as a smartphone would. And so I'm going to see if we have more questions. Jump over the chat real quick.
Yeah, Chris, this is Ashley speaking. The next question is from Michael regarding the Trekker Breeze.
Yes.
What is the lifespan of it? I.e., how long can we expect the maps to be updated?
So the Trekker Breeze itself is now, I don't know if I want to say obsolete, but it's no longer being supported. So the Trekker Breeze itself is something that existed in its original incarnation. It was the Trekker, which had many, many more buttons. Then it went to the Trekker Breeze for simplicity. If memory serves me, I'm going to say it was probably a couple of decades that we were able to utilize those devices. Although now things change much more quickly in technology. If I had to guess, I would say that the Victor Reader Trek would probably have a lifespan of about 10 years before our technology eclipses the components of that device. I don't know how quickly that will really happen, but it's probably about a decade before our technology and our abilities change to where that becomes antiquated. So the purchasing of that device, like a phone, a little bit different. Most people might keep their cell phones for, I'm just going to guesstimate, 5 years, where many people would keep their assistive device for a lot longer. So that would be kind of at least a guess at what would happen in the future. Let's see. I'm going to try to rearrange my windows for a second here. I'm going to jump back over to the live binders, and if somebody could let me know if you all still see the screen sharing in the window with the live binders, that would be very helpful. Sometimes when I'm doing Zoom, I forget, and at the moment, I don't have a second computer next to me. Awesome. Thank you for the help.
Ashley speaking. Yes, we still have live binders.
Oh, thank you very much. Very helpful. So I'm going to jump back into our accessible GPS binder. The next category here is GPS device learning guides. This is just some guides that help with the learning process. Some of these are based on older technology, but the technology is something that would allow you to, the learning guides would allow you to do the same thing with modern technology. So when we teach a bus lesson, for instance, we have we begin by riding the bus with the client or the learner. We might move to the back of the bus. We might then begin following the bus or meeting the traveler wherever they're supposed to go, and then eventually get to the point where we just give the student the assignment and then they tell us how it went. The same is true for working with GPS devices. The basics of beginning to understand wayfinding using a GPS device will be the same whether you're using a technology from 20 years ago or a technology that comes out today. The idea of understanding that the device can't do everything for you. Sometimes people receive technology and they assume that it will automatically get them to exactly where they want to go. It's just not possible, at least in today's world, for that to occur. Just as an example, if we wanted to travel to the mall, the malls are very big. We have different anchor stores, sometimes taking up several square blocks. And if I just ask the GPS device to take me to the mall, I have absolutely no idea of where that latitude and longitude location is that were set to represent the mall. So it's let's say a 10-foot square in space, but to find that actual spot where we want to be, the 1 10-foot square that's represented in the GPS log could be entirely different on the opposite side of the mall of where we're arriving or want to be arriving. So helping learners and travelers understand that it gets us in the ballpark, but we still need our mobility skills to complete the task is very important. The basics of wayfinding with a device are things like entering your destination, following directions, being able to interpret the directions that are being provided. Some devices will mistake DR for doctor, and so you have to be a little fault tolerant. or ST for saint instead of street. Those are things that just take a little bit of teaching with the student or the learner so that they understand that they have to do some interpolation in their own mind about what the device is telling them. The other challenging area for many people is that different devices and different apps will provide their instructions in different formats. So if people are used to using an analog clock and I say you're going to head toward 12 o'clock, that makes a lot of sense. If I'm working with a young person who's never been introduced to telling time on an analog clock and I ask them to walk toward 12, it won't make any sense at all. So some of the core concepts that we teach in orientation and mobility for orientation, basic orientation like the clock face, are still very, very relevant, even though we've jumped into an area of, let's say, high tech. Those types of basic lessons are going to be represented in some of these activities and learning guides. I'm going to scroll down our list a little bit more. This is just a few of the accessible apps. So Nearby Explorer from APH, the American Printing House for the Blind, is presently an app that has a price tag on it. The last time I spoke with APH, they're working toward moving everything from a paid model to a free model so that the entire app itself will be free on both platforms, but that complete transition hasn't occurred yet. So presently, when you go into the App Store, you'll find both Nearby Explorer as well as Nearby Explorer Online. The online version is free, and as long as you're connected to Wi-Fi or the internet through your cellular service, you have access to almost all of its features. The paid version will not disappear until they've been able to transfer or transition all of the features into the online version. But the last time I spoke with the folks at APH, that was their plan, was to eventually transition everything into the free model. It just hasn't occurred yet. The other apps that are listed here, Blind Square, Seeing Eye GPS, Ariadne, there are lots of others as well. There is no best app to use. The one that works best is the one that the client or the traveler is able to work with the best. Just like many people will use Waze on their phone or Maps from Apple or Google Maps or some other map program. Sometimes they like one for one reason and another for another reason. The same is true for accessible navigation apps. There are times when one will present you with information that is accurate and another one might send you somewhere different. So having options can be very, very helpful. The question just came up that so eventually Online Explorer won't use up data. It will still use data. The idea of data is that wherever you go, with your smartphone is in constant communication with both the internet to get, let's say, map details, to get bus information, to download new maps when you go into new areas. It's also in constant communication with your cellular system, if you have a cellular device, as well as with GPS satellites that are orbiting the Earth. So most phones are using what's called a GPS or assisted GPS, so that it provides some information to the phone from cellular towers, not only from the GPS, but also from cell towers, Wi-Fi locations. They basically, by working together, they can pinpoint your position much more accurately, much more efficiently. If you were functioning only on GPS, it would take much longer to identify your position and provide accurate feedback. Possible, it just takes longer. Many hikers, for instance, would not use their smartphone for knowing where they are when they are geocaching or traveling in the woods. They would use a standalone GPS device because it's geared more toward communication with only those GPS satellites. In the Android area, we already talked about the Nearby Explorer, which is available on both platforms. And for those of you that work with school-age students, I'm going to say that I'm going to use the word free, although it's not really free. You can use quota funds to purchase that app for the student. They will, at least in the past, APH would provide a code that you would use either on the iOS store or in the Google Play Store to be able to provide that learner, that student, with that app. And that app stays with them as long as that app exists. So every time it gets updated, they receive that update without having to pay again for it. When they graduate from high school or they age out, it goes with them as well because it's now living on their phone. So those are things that it's just another quote unquote free way for a school-age student to be able to obtain and use that app. There are other apps, lots and lots that have come on the scene lately. Let's see, a question just came on the screen curious about anyone who has used the toddler cane, another option for the little kids we work with. Just Andrea, just to respond to that, I haven't worked myself with someone with a toddler cane, but at the Maryland School for the Blind, we do have an individual who's working with a young person who does have the toddler cane. And a great resource for that is to go on to Dr. Grace Ambrose-Ocken's website to be able to view some of the videos to find out more about that. The next question that came up in the chat, is there a way to trial some of these paid apps before buying them? There most definitely is. The Nearby Explorer is one that has the online version, which is free. And again, that's for both platforms. Seeing AI is a 30-day trial. And so you can be working with a learner and they can download that app and begin to use it for 30 days to see if they like it. That's a much more expensive app if you buy it outright. The ability to try those for 30 days or to try the online version gives an individual sense of what it can do for them, as well as do they like navigating within the app. One of the easiest things to do is to place it let's say in a vehicle, place the learner in a vehicle so that they can travel on a bus, in a car, and automatically hear the street names as the vehicle is driving down the street. For many people, without having to worry about how to navigate within the app, how to do any landmarks, things like that, that's just like let's say the killer feature of the app is just that it will name streets for them that they've always wanted to know where they were because the bus driver didn't say it, the Uber driver didn't say it. They just wanted to be able to keep track as they went along. That's something that's very easy to work with. For school-age children, especially our preschoolers and early elementary, who are just learning their communities, that's something a parent can put on their phone. And while the parent's driving the child home from school, driving to the grocery store, the child has constant information about their environment. So we talk about incidental learning, visual incidental learning, and what many of our students miss. This can be auditory incidental learning, so that now our students have access to auditory information about where they live. They know the order or the sequence of the streets coming up to their home. They know there's certainly physical features that they might feel, like riding over train tracks, turning on a curve, but they miss some of the landmarks or street names. And so it provides them with new information that no one has to tell them because the app is relaying it for them. I'm going to jump to other innovations for just a moment. And so these are accessories that can go along with it to make some of these GPS apps a little bit more friendly. The bone conduction headphones are basically, they go over the temple and they vibrate on, I believe, the mastoid bone so that it keeps your ear canals open. The company that produces these is Aftershocks. I think there are a couple of other companies that have entered the marketplace now into either headphones that will lay over your shoulders or other bone conduction style. Lots of options. Basically, it frees your auditory channel from your ear canal so it stays open rather than putting earbuds or earphones over your ears, and allows you to have both the information from the smart device as well as from your environment. So if the bus driver calls out a stop or the bus driver relays information, you can hear that without blocking your ear canal. When you're ready to cross the street, there's no need to remove earplugs or AirPods or whatever else you might be using. Your ear canal is already open. It's almost like adding an entire channel to what you're doing. I'm going to read a couple of things that have come in onto the chat here. Let's see. And I don't see any questions at the moment, but great comments about the headphones and things. And I'm glad that everybody's aware of the bone conduction. And I'm going to jump to some other items. There's the haptic footwear. This is something that, let's see if I can get the web page to load, possibly. This is tactile information for your feet that is connected with an app and a smartphone. And basically, let's see if we can get that web page to load here. As a traveler is walking, there are small pods about the size of a matchbook that would go either into your shoe, basically in the insole, or clip on the outside of your shoe that would vibrate when it's time to make a turn. You know whether to turn right or you turn left based on which foot is vibrating. Not sure why that web page is not loading, but could be just my internet connection, sorry. Let's see, there are other options that come out all the time in terms of our wearable devices. The idea of a wearable device with wayfinding is that your attention is going to be occupied as you're traveling, just as a young teen driver needs to be paying attention to the brake and the gas pedal. We don't want to put a smartphone in front of them so that we wouldn't want them to get distracted. They have to learn the basics. The same is true for our early travelers. When someone is getting to the point that they're able to take on new information, we look for places to add that information that do not take away from their ability to attend to their environment. So for those that are visual, if we have our phone in front of our face, we're no longer able to preview our environment. Auditorily, we talked about blocking up that channel. So by applying information to another part of our body, whether it's our foot, in the case of the lateral shoes, or to our wrist with a smartwatch, we're able to get information at a new location. And so we're basically using that new channel to provide haptic feedback. The haptics is a new learning phase. For the Apple Watch, for instance, we have to be able to understand what different vibration patterns mean. Just like we might understand what a different tone means when we get a call or a text, there are different vibration patterns to turn right, to turn left, to respond to a text. For individuals with dual sensory loss, excuse me, that's another way for them to obtain that information. Let's see. Just going to read a note here from Autumn, who says, the aftershock is good if you get the higher quality version, but it's difficult to hear and others to hear you in the background noise like traffic. It's still a good tool and better than taking out hearing aids while traveling on foot. And yes, there are different versions of the headphones. They keep improving. Nothing is going to be as ideal as using headphones that fit right over the top or having a direct channel. But it's something that at least allows us to have some ability to pick up on other cues for those that, for instance, can use some form of echolocation, either a passive or an active echolocation. That would be removed if we put any kind of an earbud or earphones in, but by using the aftershocks, it allows us to still have that information. I'm going to jump back to our binders real quick. Whoop. Okay. There are lots of binders here on all sorts of different topics. There are some that are specific to technology, such as iOS devices or Android devices. And again, you can plug away at these anytime you'd like. One of the other options that's helpful with wayfinding is using accessible maps. There are many different kinds of accessible maps. We have tactile maps. I guess I'm going to take a few steps back and think about some of our students who are at just beginning with their independent travel, those that are maybe using tactile symbols in its most basic form, those tactile symbols on the walls in classrooms or in the hallways allows a traveler to know when they've reached a familiar destination. Just like if you were visual traveling in a medical building, the office number outside of your doctor's office or the Braille, the tactile symbol is going to provide that same information for you. The moving from that basic tactile symbol where it might be something related to the classroom, for instance, a bell in front of the music room, a Lego in front of the science room, whatever it might be that's salient to that student can be very helpful. We can then transition into using a map where we make very basic maps. For those of you that are familiar with the APH product Tactile Town, you can use that for making a simple room with 4 sides and then begin to help a young person or an adult who's just new to tactile maps how to understand physical space represented in map space. That can be a very challenging concept. There are many people who have never developed the ability to create a square. They can tell you what a square is by defining that it's a shape with 4 sides and 4 corners. They can tell you it's different than a rectangle because the rectangle has 2 long sides and 2 short sides. But for them to actually create a square is something that they never had the opportunity to learn. And so you may have to go all the way back to basics to help them. And this could be true even for, let's say, a PhD professor. Those gaps in our conceptual understanding may be there because it was easy or time efficient to skip over them at some point in their life. The ability to create a cognitive map is based on these basic shapes. So to understand what a square is when we create a map and try to transfer map space into physical space using our brain as that interpreting tool, we have to be able to understand that 2 sides come together to make a corner. If we haven't understood that basic concept, tactile maps aren't going to be able to help us much. So we have to make sure that we have those foundation skills first. Within this binder, there are lots of resources for understanding about creating tactile maps. When you click on the tab that's on the left, it will open up the contents of that particular tab. And so there are different details here about helping with early map skills, just like pre-Braille skills, where we're just following lines with the fingertips, developing that tactile sensitivity, that ability to discern between 2 different places. There are also guides which will help you to understand how close 2 things can be before the finger can no longer discern a difference. So for many of our technology excitements that come about new advances, let's say 3D printing, we might get very excited about the ability to take a picture of a city and make a 3D map or 3D model out of it. It sounds terrific. It comes out of the machine on let's say a 7-inch square plate. The challenge is that everything is so close together that tactilely I can no longer discern it. So we have to have a different scale when we work with tactile maps, tactile information, in order for it to be effective. The ability to understand tactile information for wayfinding is a bit like looking through a straw. So if you look through a straw, just like let's say an advanced RP field of view, that would be something that you could see things, but to get the whole picture, it would take some time to look across a whole, let's say, mural on a wall. The same is true for understanding tactile information on a map. In order to be able to use that effectively for wayfinding, we have to take that 1 fingertip or possibly 2 hands, depending on how you're searching, and gather all that information to understand what's there, and then go back and look for the details. So just handing an individual a tactile map doesn't necessarily make it accessible. In order for it to be accessible, we have to help that individual develop the skills, the concepts to be able to access the information that's there. And it can take, it's a process. This is another reason for encouraging very early engagement of orientation mobility specialists with young students so that these skills can be introduced and developed so that by the time they're in middle school and high school, they can be interpreting maps that they'll use in college or adult life of either a college campus or downtown environment. Tactile maps are beginning to be installed in more and more locations, such as public transit systems. If you go to New York, there are experimental subway stations that have labs, so to speak, to try out things to see how they will work with travelers. So if a traveler that you're working with has never been exposed to tactile maps, beginning to introduce that can really help them to be able to access these new technologies, even though they seem low tech because they don't take batteries or get plugged in. It can still help them to access that information in a way that is usable for them. Other resources that are here include ways to make your own tactile maps. They don't necessarily have to be things that are $1,000 items. It can be as simple as dried macaroni glued to a piece of cardboard. But there are some guides here that will be helpful for you. I'm going to jump to the next tabs here. There's a section on different map making materials. If you want to use a computer and some special paper, there's paper that's called swell paper. It will swell or become embossed by passing it through a light machine. If you happen to be near a school for the blind or a lighthouse for the blind and you don't have a machine on your own, it's very possible that they might be willing to partner with you to produce some of those so that the individuals that you're working with are able to have access to that information. The worst they can say is no. Typically, people are really excited about wanting to provide that information. There are also some services like the San Francisco Lighthouse that will produce maps for you. So those are now available by some areas. Again, there's some things like the 3D printing that though they'll make it and send it to you, it may not be discernible by the client you're working with, even for those without any challenges with neuropathy. There are also, in terms of accessibility, auditory maps or described maps. And as an adjunct to that, there's also audio tactile, so that now you're combining both tactile with the supplement or complement of the audio. There's lots of different ways that people are providing that location wayfinding information. These are just a few suggestions that you might be able to share with clients or those that they're working with. I'm going to try to jump back here. Going to go over a couple more binders. We just did the maps. Again, there's information about different technologies. There's, in terms of location literacy, this is, we talked about wayfinding and the GPS. There's a section here I'm going to open up in the middle that's about how GPS works. In order for a traveler to understand what's happening or the magic, it's a little bit like when we flip the light switch. To some extent, we think of it as magic. The light goes on. We don't necessarily consider where the electricity came from in the house, how the electricity got to the house, where the generation plant is. It can be helpful with GPS for people to understand the basics of it so that when they get into an area like a downtown environment or a subway, why it is that their GPS device is no longer providing them with the information it once had. Because the GPS system, the global positioning system, works via line of sight. It needs to have the ability to not have blocked interference like tall buildings. It's called the urban canyon effect. So helping people to understand the limitations of a device can be very helpful. It's also helpful to let our travelers know that for all intents and purposes, a GPS is different than a compass. A GPS knows where you are. It doesn't know which way you're facing. A GPS knows a location. It doesn't know the direction of travel unless you're traveling and it monitors that travel. So for some of our devices, for instance, the Victor Trek from Humanware, it can't tell you which direction you're facing. It can only tell you which direction you're facing if you've been walking that direction for at least 30 feet. Your smartphone, with the apps, your smartphone does contain both a compass as well as a GPS app if you've installed one. So your smartphone's a little bit different in that regard. The Braille compasses are much harder to find because the company that was producing them has discontinued their production. So if you're lucky enough to have one, that's terrific. It's a great concept to develop. Many people now are defaulting to using the Compass app on a phone. If you have an Android phone that did not come pre-installed with Compass, as the iOS or the Apple phone is, you can download those. There are many free versions. There are low vision versions. There are different ways of getting that information. Lots of different resources that you can use for that. Let's see. In terms of creating and using the accessible maps, this will just jump you back over to the other binder. And other resources, if you happen to be working with someone who is very talented with tactile maps, this is a tactile caliper. It basically measures by the 16th of an inch, so that if you were looking at very fine details of, can you tell the difference between how a street is represented and how a freeway is represented by the size of the line? Those are things that would be difficult to discern for some people, at least initially, and having something to measure the difference to demonstrate. This particular tool will measure in inches and 16ths of an inch, which would be, I think, rather impossible for a finger to do with the Braille as well. There was just a note from Jeff about audible compasses work well. They do work well. The challenge with at least the audible compasses that I found is that because they are battery operated, sometimes we can be in the community and the battery stops working, and unfortunately it takes a specialized battery that not every CVS will or Walgreens or any particular store will carry. So making sure that you have a backup battery, or that the individual who's using it has a backup battery, is very helpful. The nice feature about the Audible Compass is that it will also provide different languages. I think basically stock they come with Spanish and English, but you can also request different languages for the talking compass. And okay. In terms of, I'm going to jump to a different topic if I can find it here. Since we are just getting into a phase of COVID-19, and finding that we can no longer often be directly with a student, at least those that are school age and some adult facilities, looking for ways to provide that information remotely. There is the ability to use features like FaceTime or this Zoom platform. There are also services that individuals can use like Ira, which provides the ability to have I think a 5-minute call for free. So you basically have a virtual assistant. It's not really a virtual, they're not physically with you, but they do physically exist to be able to help you to navigate or to provide information. So as an orientation mobility specialist, sometimes helping the learner to know how to ask the question that they need. So let's say that they're standing at an intersection that's a roundabout. They might ask, how many legs of the intersection, how many streets come into this roundabout, for instance, which direction do I travel to get to whatever it might be. So helping them to work through those so that they can be effective and efficient in that 5 minutes of use can be very helpful. There are other crowdsourced apps like Be My Eyes that will be able to connect a traveler with a helper. You don't get to pick who the helper is. They're not necessarily trained. They're just volunteers. But that's one that is free. In terms of O&M instructors providing instruction, thinking about how you can use other family members to be able to help with that. So you might be able to encourage them to walk around the block together, take those trips. You might even ask the parent, could they not videotape, but use a screen sharing service such as this, Zoom technology or FaceTime, to be able to allow you to see what's happening as the student is traveling around the block, or take a video and upload it to a cloud service. There's a terrific comment from Sarah that this is how she provides O&M in rural Alaska. And Sarah, we could learn a lot from you right now, because it's something that everyone is really struggling with, to know how do we provide services when we can't be physically with our students. There are some examples here of telepractice, telehealth, where different therapies, different related service providers such as OT or PT or speech and language have provided remote instruction. And so you may want to view those just to get a sense of what can I do by asking the parent to work out that activity with the child, so that you are the coach. You're providing feedback while being able to view while you're at home or your office or wherever it is that you're allowed to be, so that the parent can deliver the instruction. You are coaching them through it. Lots of different ways that this can come about. It looks like I have about 1 minute left, and I didn't leave time for questions, though I really appreciate you all providing comments and asking questions as we went. Does anyone have questions?
Chris, this is Ashley speaking. You have until 3:05, so we do have time for questions.
Okay. Does anybody have questions? Not seeing any. I'm going to continue rambling.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Here we go. What is the best voiceover tutorial you have found? I'm going to jump. That's a question from Michael. Michael, I'm going to jump back for a second to the folder on iOS. And there are a selection. I'm sorry, I've developed these over a couple of years, and so this one's arranged a little bit differently. And there are several different voiceover reference guides here. It really depends on the individual. There are some from Hadley School for the Blind has a website where it's a video for those that prefer the video format. There are some that are podcasts. There are some that are just guides that you can click on to get basically like a blog post that might show a chart of finger gestures. So there isn't one best. It really is whatever matches with the individual person. I'm just going to click on this Hadley instructional videos to give you an example. I'm going to pull it up as a full web page. This has wonderful video examples. So I could choose, for instance, the iPhone or the iPad. It would then take me in. I find the type of activity that I want, and I then can play that to hear about it. Or if an individual has some vision, they can see the examples. But they do an excellent job of describing what's on the screen as those things are happening. If I want to just see some of the gestures so that I have a reference guide for that, there are different types of things like this example where it's just a sketch of a phone with an individual gesture that is a great reminder, or in this case, a cheat sheet, so to speak, of how you can use those gestures. They start with single finger gestures, and go all the way up to, I believe we got like 4 and 5 finger gestures. So it's something that has a level of complexity that continues to grow and develop. Let's see. And thank you very much, Michael. There's also different features for the Android system. So if you're looking for Android devices and how you can use TalkBack, there's also a folder that's just for Android that has the gestures as well as working with that system. And both systems continue to be developed with every update that we have for operating systems on the phone. These systems for accessibility are also updated. There's a tremendous website that I'm going to put up on the screen here. It's included in one of the binders, but I'm going to add just, it's called Applebee's. Applebee's.com is a website that is exclusively based for Apple products, but it's all focused on accessibility. So their tagline at the top here says, empowering blind and low vision users of Apple products and related applications. So if you want to find out about any particular app and what its accessibility is like, you can find out about it here. You can read what others have, how they've tried it, what they've felt about it. They will also provide different types of learning tools. Let's see, Autumn has a question about how do I access this folder? So by going to, I'm just gonna do a new tab here. If you go to livebinders.com and you go to the search screen, it will bring up two search fields. And the second field, if you choose author in the drop-down list, then you can put in my last name, Tabb, and it will bring up all the binders. And hopefully that will be an easy way to get there. The next question from Michael, when starting out with a new student in GPS, do you go through all the settings or turn off some of the options to simplify beginning use in the field? It depends on the kind of the stress level of the student or their ability to handle stress. If they are easily frustrated, I would minimize the amount of interference that we're introducing. So any app, for instance, might call out new cities, new streets, new points of interest. If this is a person with low frustration tolerance, I might just make it where it's only naming new streets. So they don't have to selectively filter with their attention every time they pass a new address, every time they pass a Starbucks, every time they pass whatever point of interest. So by gauging your client or your learner's abilities and their frustration tolerance, it can help you to know whether you can fully open up the box of options for them or if you just want to feed it to them slowly. It's really going to be an individually based introduction to those skills.
All right, Chris, I'm going to stop you there. This is Becky. We've reached the end of our session. Thank you so much, Chris Tabb, for presenting in this format. Really interesting stuff and really practical for a lot of our attendees.